Russia in the late 18th century was a land of sharp contrasts. It was, a vast and sprawling empire, stretching across frozen tundras and deep dark forests. For most people, life was incredibly hard. They were serfs, tied to the land and to their masters. Their world was one of mud, wood, and superstition. But in the heart of this empire, in the city of St. Petersburg, there was another world entirely. This was a world of unimaginable wealth, power, and glittering ambition. It was a city built to rival the grand capitals of Europe, a window looking westwards, and at the very center of this world was the Winter Palace. The Winter Palace was not just a home. It was a statement. It was a colossal building, painted a striking shade of green, with over 1,000 rooms. Its gilded halls stretched on, seemingly forever. Imagine walking through it. Your feet would echo on polished parquet floors. You would see walls covered in silk and hung with priceless paintings. Light from 1,000 candles would dance on golden decorations and crystal chandeliers. It was a labyrinth of luxury, designed to impress and to intimidate. But palaces like this are also full of secrets. Behind the grand facades, there are always whispers. There are hidden corridors, quiet antechambers, and servants who see and hear everything. The palace felt like a world of its own, sealed off from the harsh realities of Russia. It was a stage for magnificent balls, for political theater, and for courtly intrigue. Nobles in powdered wigs and elaborate gowns would glide through its rooms, their conversations a delicate dance of compliments and veiled threats. Ambassadors from foreign lands would marvel at its scale and splendor, sending reports back to their kings and queens about this formidable northern empire. The air itself seemed thick with the scent of beeswax, expensive perfume, and the faint, ever-present chill that seeped in from the frozen river Neva outside. This was Catherine the Great's domain. Every corner of the Winter Palace spoke of its mistress's power. She had shaped it, just as she had shaped modern Russia. The art she collected, the architecture she commissioned, the very etiquette of her court. It all reflected her tastes and her formidable intellect. But a place so vast and so filled with history can also feel haunted. The sheer weight of the past hangs in the air. The countless lives that have passed through its halls leave an invisible imprint. As the 18th century drew to a close, the magnificent Winter Palace was about to become the setting for one of history's most chilling and mysterious tales, a story that would forever be linked to the final days of its powerful empress. By the autumn of 1796, Catherine the Great had ruled Russia for over 30 years. What a reign it had been! She was a German princess who had arrived in Russia as a teenager, married to a man she despised. But Catherine was no ordinary princess. She was clever, ruthless, and incredibly ambitious. She had seized the throne in a bold coup, overthrowing her own husband. She then went on to expand her empire, reform its laws, and fill her court with the greatest minds of the age. She was the enlightened despot, a friend to philosophers like Voltaire, and a woman who ruled with an iron will. She had made Russia a true European superpower. But time, the great leveler, comes for everyone, even an empress. The Catherine of 1796 was not the vibrant young woman who had seized power. She was now 67 years old. The decades of relentless work, political battles, and personal heartaches had taken their toll. Her body was heavy, and she often suffered from swollen legs which made walking difficult. She was still sharp, still in command, but a weariness had begun to creep in. Her once bright eyes were now clouded with the anxieties of her age. She had survived plots, betrayals, and wars, but now she faced a new set of enemies, her own mortality and the ghosts of her past. Catherine was a woman surrounded by luxury, but she was also deeply isolated. Power's a lonely business. She had outlived many of her friends, her lovers, and her intellectual sparring partners. Her son and heir, Paul, was a source of constant worry. She disliked him immensely, and he returned the feeling. Paul was a bitter, difficult man who she feared would undo all her life's work the moment he took the throne. This fear gnawed at her. She worried constantly about the future of the empire she had built. The weight of Russia rested entirely on her shoulders, and she felt that weight more heavily with each passing day. In her private apartments, away from the prying eyes of the court, Catherine was a creature of habit. She rose early, worked tirelessly at her desk, and maintained a strict routine. But the nights were long. In the quiet, candlelit hours, the magnificent palace could feel more like a prison. The shadows in the long corridors seemed to stretch and deepen. Did she think about the husband she had overthrown, who was murdered shortly after? Did she worry about the pretenders who had challenged her right to rule? We can only imagine. But we know she was a pragmatic, unsentimental woman. She was not one for fanciful stories or superstitions, which makes what happened next all the more extraordinary. The story begins on a cold November evening. The exact date is debated by historians, but it was just days before Catherine's death. A strange stillness had fallen over the winter palace. The Empress had retired early to her bedchamber, complaining of feeling unwell. This was unusual. Catherine was known for her stamina and her disciplined routine. Her attendants, a small group of ladies-in-waiting and valets, were waiting quietly in an adjoining room. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to disturb their imperial mistress. The palace was a place of strict etiquette, and the Empress's private chambers were its most sacred space. The air was tense with a quiet concern. Suddenly, one of her valets, a trusted servant named Zakhar Zotov, noticed something odd. He glanced through a doorway that led into the magnificent throne room. He stopped, his blood running cold. He saw a figure sitting on the great imperial throne. This was shocking. No one, absolutely no one, was permitted to sit on the throne except the Empress herself. It was the ultimate symbol of her authority. Peering closer, his confusion turned to disbelief. The figure on the throne was a woman. She was dressed in the grand style of the court, and she looked exactly like Catherine the Great. The valet rubbed his eyes, thinking he must be dreaming or that the flickering candlelight was playing tricks on him. But the figure remained. It was Catherine, yet not Catherine. She sat completely still, her face pale and sorrowful, her expression filled with a profound melancholy. He quickly and quietly alerted the other attendants. One by one, they crept to the doorway and looked in. They all saw the same impossible sight. There, on the throne, sat the Empress of all Russia. But how could this be? They knew for a fact that the real Catherine was in her bedroom, just a few feet away from them. The atmosphere in the antechamber turned from concern to sheer terror. What were they to do? To disturb the Empress in her bedroom was unthinkable. To ignore a stranger sitting on her throne was equally impossible. And this was no ordinary stranger. This was her double, her phantom twin. The attendants were paralyzed by fear and confusion. They were simple people, many of whom had grown up with folk tales and superstitions. They knew what it meant when a person saw their own double. It was a death omen. The sight of this silent, sorrowful apparition sitting on the seat of power could only mean one thing: disaster was coming. The terrified attendants huddled together, whispering frantically. Who would dare to tell the Empress what they had seen? The duty fell to her most senior lady-in-waiting. With trembling hands, she knocked softly on the door of Catherine's bedchamber. She entered to find the Empress awake, sitting up in her bed and looking puzzled by the commotion. The lady-in-waiting struggled to find the words. She stammered out the unbelievable story, that a figure, an apparition that looked exactly like Her Majesty, was at that very moment sitting on the throne in the next room. Catherine, ever the rationalist, was not a woman to believe in ghosts. She was annoyed, not scared. She thought her servants were drunk or mad. Annoyed and determined to put a stop to this nonsense, Catherine rose from her bed. She was a formidable presence, even in her night clothes. Leaning on the arm of an attendant, she walked slowly but purposefully from her bedroom toward the throne room. Her servants followed behind her, their hearts pounding in their chests. What would she find? What would she do? The real Empress, aged and weary, moved toward the ghostly image of herself. It must have been a truly surreal procession through the quiet, gilded halls of the palace, the living Empress going to confront her own phantom. Catherine reached the doorway of the throne room and looked in, and there it was. She saw exactly what her servants had described. A woman, her perfect double, sat silently on the throne. The apparition stared back at her with a look of deep, inconsolable sadness. For a moment, even the great Catherine was shaken. She stared at the phantom, and the phantom stared back. The room was silent except for the crackling of candles. Here was a direct challenge to her authority, not from a political rival, but from something beyond the realm of reason. It was an image of herself, but drained of life and power, a ghostly usurper on her own seat of power. Catherine's shock quickly turned to anger. She would not be intimidated, not even by a ghost. This was her palace, her throne, her empire. Turning to the captain of her personal guard, who had been summoned in the chaos, her voice was firm and cold. "That is my phantom," she declared, pointing at the apparition. Her command was chilling and absolute. "Shoot it!" The guards raised their muskets, their faces pale with fear. They took aim at the ghostly figure on the throne. But just as they prepared to fire, the phantom wavered, like heat rising from a road. And then, in an instant, it vanished completely. The throne was empty. After the phantom vanished, a heavy, unnatural silence fell over the throne room. The guards lowered their muskets, their eyes wide with disbelief. The attendants stood frozen, too terrified to speak. Catherine herself stood for a long moment, staring at the empty throne. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. Did she see it as a silly trick of the light, or did the sight of her own deathly double truly shake her? She was a woman who prided herself on logic and reason, but what she had just witnessed really defied all rational explanation. Without another word, she turned and made her way slowly back to her bedchamber, leaving her court in a state of shock. The next few days passed in a strange, tense quiet. Catherine went about her daily routine as if nothing had happened. She attended to state papers, met with advisors, and maintained her usual schedule. She never spoke of the phantom again. Maybe she was trying to force the incident from her mind, to prove to herself and to everyone else that she was still in control. But her attendants noticed a change. There was a new fragility about her, a deep weariness that her iron will could no longer hide. The shadow of the apparition seemed to linger in the palace, a silent, unspoken dread that just hung in the air. Everyone was waiting, though no one really knew for what. The wait was not long. On the morning of November 17, 1796, just a few days after the sighting of the doppelganger, Catherine rose at her usual early hour. She had her morning coffee and went to her study to work. But soon after, her attendants heard a loud crash from her private chambers. They rushed in to find a devastating sight. The great Empress, the ruler of all Russia, had collapsed onto the floor. She had suffered a massive stroke. Her face was purple, and she was struggling for breath. The woman who had commanded an empire with absolute authority was now utterly helpless. Catherine was lifted by her servants and laid upon a mattress on the floor, as she was too heavy to be moved back to her bed. She lingered for another day and a half, unconscious and unresponsive. The finest doctors in St. Petersburg were summoned, but there was nothing they could do. The palace, once a hub of vibrant activity, fell into a somber hush. Courtiers whispered in shadowed corners, their ambitions and fears now focused on her son, Paul. On the evening of November 17th, Catherine the Great, the woman who had defined an era, breathed her last. The prophecy of the phantom on the throne had been fulfilled. Section 6. The Omen of the Double. The news of Catherine's death spread like wildfire, and with it, the story of her ghostly double. For the people of Russia and across Europe, the meaning was clear. This was not just a strange coincidence. It was a supernatural omen. The belief in the doppelganger, or the double walker, is an ancient and powerful one, found in folklore all over the world. To see one's own ghost or spiritual double was considered the most terrifying of portents. It was almost universally seen as a harbinger of death. The idea is that the spirit detaches itself from the body just before the end, appearing as a ghostly twin to announce its imminent departure from the world. This was not a new idea in the 18th century. European folklore was filled with stories of famous and ordinary people who had encountered their own doubles. The English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley was said to have seen his doppelganger shortly before he drowned. Queen Elizabeth I of England, another powerful female monarch, was rumored to have seen her own double lying on her bed as if already dead. These tales were part of the cultural fabric of the time. They tapped into a deep human fear of mortality and the unknown. The double represents the self, but a self that is no longer part of the living world. It is a chilling reminder that our time is finite. The story of Catherine's phantom fit this pattern perfectly. The details were just too symbolic to ignore. The ghost was not seen in a random corridor or a forgotten room. It was seen sitting on the imperial throne, the very seat of Catherine's power and identity. This suggested not just the death of the person, but the end of her reign. The phantom's sorrowful expression was also significant. It wasn't a malicious or angry ghost. It was a sad one, as if mourning the end of a great era. It was as if Catherine's own spirit was already grieving for the life and the power it was about to lose. So, when Catherine collapsed and died so soon after ordering her guards to shoot her phantom, the legend was sealed. It confirmed what everyone who heard the story already believed, that the Empress had seen her own death coming. The tale provided a supernatural explanation for a natural event. It transformed a sad, medical reality, the death of an elderly woman from a stroke, into a dramatic, gothic tale worthy of an empress. The story of the phantom double gave Catherine's death a sense of mythic inevitability, as if her passing had been ordained by forces beyond human understanding. It was a fittingly grand and mysterious end for a larger-than-life ruler. Section 7. Why Catherine's ghost? So why did this particular ghost story become so famous? Why has it endured for over 2 centuries? Part of the answer lies with Catherine herself. She wasn't just any monarch. She was Catherine the Great. Her life was already the stuff of legend. She was a woman who had clawed her way to the pinnacle of power in a man's world. Her reign was filled with high drama, a coup d'etat, wars of expansion, famous love affairs, and a dazzling intellectual court. She was a complex and often controversial figure. People were fascinated by her, both in her lifetime and after her death. A mundane end just didn't seem to suit her. The story also spread because it had powerful witnesses. It wasn't just a rumor started by a single, unreliable person. According to the legend, it was seen by a group of her closest attendants and even by Catherine herself. The detail about her ordering the guards to shoot the phantom adds a layer of dramatic action and credibility to the tale. It shows Catherine not as a passive victim of a haunting, but as the defiant ruler she always was, confronting the omen of her own death head-on. This detail makes the story far more compelling. It's a clash not just between the living and the dead, but between a powerful will and an inescapable fate. Furthermore, the timing of the story was perfect. It emerged right at the moment of her death, a time of great uncertainty for the Russian Empire. Her son, Paul I, was about to take the throne, and many in the nobility feared his rule. He despised his mother's legacy and would spend his short reign trying to undo it. The story of the Phantom Empress, sorrowfully occupying the throne, could be seen as a symbol of this anxiety. It was as if Catherine's spirit was mourning not just her own death, but the uncertain future of the empire she had built. The ghost story became a way for people to express their fears about the political transition. Finally, legends need storytellers, and Catherine's story had plenty. It was first recorded in the memoirs of French courtiers and diplomats who were present in St. Petersburg at the time. These accounts, filled with gossip and dramatic flair, were eagerly read across Europe. The story of the Phantom Empress was the perfect Gothic tale. A powerful queen, a mysterious palace, a ghostly omen, and a sudden death. It captured the imagination of a continent that was fascinated by tales of the supernatural. The story transformed Catherine from a historical figure into a character in a dark fairy tale, ensuring her legend would live on. Section 8. The Power of a Legend. But what really happened in the Winter Palace in those final days of Catherine's life? Was there truly a ghost, or can we find a more rational explanation? One possibility is that the entire story is just that, a story. It might have been invented after her death to give her passing a more dramatic and memorable quality. History is full of such embellished tales, especially surrounding the deaths of famous rulers. A legend about a ghostly omen is far more exciting than the simple medical fact of a stroke. The story could have been a piece of political theater, created to add to the myth of the great Empress. Another more psychological explanation is that it was a collective hallucination, born of stress and anxiety. The palace attendants were deeply concerned about their aging mistress. They knew she was unwell, and they were aware of the political tension swirling around the succession. In the dimly lit, cavernous rooms of the Winter Palace, it's plausible that flickering candlelight, shadows, and heightened emotions could have combined to create a shared, mistaken vision. They saw what they subconsciously feared, an omen of the Empress' death. When Catherine herself saw it, she might have been influenced by their terror, her own mind playing tricks on her in a moment of stress. Perhaps the most intriguing theory is that it was a deliberate trick. Could a lady-in-waiting, or another member of the court, have dressed up to look like the Empress? It seems unlikely, given the extreme risk. To sit on the throne was an act of treason, punishable by death. Who would dare to perform such a dangerous prank, and for what purpose? Yet the court of Catherine was a place of endless intrigue. Perhaps an enemy wanted to frighten the aging Empress, to hasten her decline. Or perhaps a supporter wanted to create a myth that would elevate her status even further in death. The truth is, we will never know for sure. Ultimately, whether the phantom was real, a hallucination, or a fabrication almost doesn't matter. Its power lies in what it represents. The story of the phantom on the throne is a story about the end of an era. It captures the transition of power, the fear of the unknown, and the immense, almost supernatural aura that surrounded Catherine the Great. The legend became a part of her identity, a final, dramatic chapter in a life that was already larger than life. The empty throne, a phantom ruler, and a sudden death. It's a powerful narrative that speaks to our fascination with power, mortality, and the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of our understanding. Section 9. The Final Reflection. Catherine the Great's legacy is written across the map of Russia and in the pages of history books. She was a builder of cities, a conqueror of lands, and a patron of the arts and sciences. She transformed Russia into a modern European power, a legacy that endured long after her death. Her reign was a testament to her incredible intelligence, her political skill, and her sheer force of will. She was, without question, one of the most remarkable rulers in history. Her story is one of ambition, power, and dazzling success against all odds. She crafted her own image with immense care throughout her life. But it is the legend of her death that adds a final, unforgettable touch of mystery to her story. The image of the weary, aging Empress confronting her own sorrowful ghost is profoundly powerful. It humanizes her. In that moment, she is not just the all-powerful autocrat, she is a mortal woman facing the end. The story strips away the imperial grandeur to reveal a universal human fear. It's a reminder that no amount of power, wealth, or intellect can hold off the inevitable. The phantom on the throne represents the moment when control is lost, when fate takes over. The tale of the Phantom Empress has become an inseparable part of her biography, as famous as her political triumphs and her scandalous love life. It continues to capture our imagination because it operates on so many levels. It is a chilling ghost story, a piece of political symbolism, and a profound meditation on mortality. It reflects the awe and fear she inspired in those around her. They couldn't imagine her simply fading away. Her end had to be as dramatic as her life. The legend ensured that even in death, Catherine the Great remained a figure of mystery and immense power. So, was the ghost a warning from the spirit world? A trick of the mind brought on by fear and flickering candlelight? Or a cleverly crafted story designed to cement a legend? Perhaps it was a combination of all three. The truth is lost to the mists of time, hidden in the labyrinthine corridors of the Winter Palace. What remains is the story itself, a final, haunting image of an empress who ruled a vast empire, but who, in the end, could not command her own destiny. The phantom on the throne ensures that Catherine the Great's reign did not simply end. It vanished, like a ghost, into legend.